Well, hey there. Warhammer Space Marine was a game that initially released in 2011 to mostly middle-of-the-road reviews, sitting at a 76 for the score provided by the critics, meaning that most outlets that reviewed it gave it somewhere between a 7 and an 8. And I think for a game that released near the end of the PS3 and Xbox 360 lifespan, it is roughly a 7. It doesn't really do anything refreshing, it sticks to a lot of those brown basic corridors for shooting, and has some mostly basic melee and shooting segments, but is it fun? Sure. I got through it without being bored, and it felt good to control for the most part. Sometimes it was a little janky and rough, but other times, I felt like a badass fucking Space Marine cutting everything in half as I mowed through every single foe they put in front of me. If only I could have fought some alien orcs and stuff when I was active duty. Oh well though. Without further ado, let's get into this review. And first off, this review is for the master crafted version of the game, which just came out very recently, which apparently is pretty identical to the anniversary and the original release with some very slight upgrades. The game is a very straightforward linear third-person shooter from the late 2000s or in the early 2010s. You run through some levels without many side areas to explore, you get some new weapons and pickups along the way, and you keep running through those zones until you reach the next one. Completing very basic story beats as you make your way through it. It is a remaster though, so these zones are spruced up a little bit with slightly crisper audio and UI design, but we'll dig more into all those later in the review. But you should know before possibly playing this that it costs the same as the anniversary edition, both being at $40. Although I did play this on Game Pass, most people are not recommending this due to it being filled with more bugs and less improvements compared to the anniversary edition, so take that information and make an educated purchase. The story is probably the most interesting element of Space Marine, and as most people know anything about Warhammer will tell you, it's called grimdark for a reason. This term is used for the universe of Warhammer 40k because of how fucked up the people and the creatures are within it. From god kings and emperors to mystical, magical, tyrannical, nonsensical politics that happens around every single corner. Space Marine spares no time getting you into the thick of things. It doesn't have a glossary or anything to reference, so a lot of these terms could go right over your head. But you're gonna play it and you're gonna enjoy it. Or you won't. And that's okay, because you'll murder everything for the sake of the Emperor and the chapter. But with so much politics and world building done for the universe, it's a little sad to leave a lot on the table for this game. You're playing as a captain named Titus, who is a badass in his own right. Following him are two other extremely loyal Space Marines. You and your team are sent to stop the orcs from stealing and ravaging this planet that holds vital resources. You work your way through non-stop hordes of orcs. You learn that there's a bit of a bigger problem, that there's an Inquisitor trying to prevent it from happening, something regarding warp and chaos energies and yada yada. Like I said, it's a lot of random things that you might not know unless you read up on this stuff. Basically, there's a bad guy who is a big bad chaos prince pretending to be the Inquisitor. He uses this to trick and lead the Space Marines to more or less do his bidding, but he tricks them by making it seem like he's preventing the orcs from obtaining access to this greater power. Captain Titus and his two Space Marines are going through trying to stop these orcs, help the Inquisitor, but as soon as they realize the Inquisitor is actually this Chaos Prince, well, that opens up these warp portals where Chaos Demons start pouring out of everywhere. Now that the warp energy is everywhere and these Chaos Demons are running around all over the place, you've got to chase down this big-ass Chaos dude to prevent him from utilizing this extremely powerful source to become even stronger. Now you're fighting orcs and Chaos Demons alike, sometimes they're fighting each other. You work your way through some of the same previous zones until you finally take on the big bad guy. Once you do, you save the planet pretty much, but your right-hand man Sidonus does get killed right near the end of the game, and then the other guy, the third person in your group, well, he's a rat bitch. And by that I mean he snitches on you as soon as he can to the chapter to try and say that you're a traitor. He calls you out, stating that you're not affected by the warp energy and possibly being closer to this scourge of chaos in the world. You're told by the Inquisition that shows up that if you don't surrender, then they will torture everyone and anyone that you interacted with or that was underneath you. So Titus chooses to surrender fully and not allowing anyone else to suffer, all because he spoke with them or they were under his command. But as Titus is taken into custody and you know he's going to be tortured to hell and back, he mentions, well, of course he's not a traitor, and any thoughts of him being a heretic are just flat out wrong, that he will gladly prove his innocence. And that's where the game ends. Between the combat sections as well, there are small cutscenes that give you this story, and if it's not fed to you directly into a cutscene, you're just gonna walk down a hallway as two different characters kind of just talk at each other. The way it's delivered is a little bit lacking, but that's going to be it for the story. It's interesting to see the smaller details come to life, like the different chapters of the universe coming together to fight on a big bridge and how that kind of means a lot for them, or getting snippets from characters about the different chaos and warp energies leads to a ton of intrigue in this world. But it does sort of suck because this game is not specifically set up to give you any details about it, leading you to either look this up on your own or seek out other games or media for the lore that you want to get into, which there is a fuck ton, so be warned before you dive in headfirst. Moving on from the story, the gameplay and progression are going to be lumped into one here because it's all very straightforward. You have a melee weapon, you got a few guns. There's a pretty large variety of these as well, allowing you to pick and choose how you want to handle the combat. As you continue to progress through the story, you gain access to new weapons and armaments over that time. You have a pistol with unlimited ammo, but the other weapons can more or less be changed out at your leisure. The way that I played the game was I took one short and one long range weapon to go into every combat scenario with. That way I could pick off the annoying people with a sniper sitting in the back just pestering me, but then the moment that the pack of enemies ran straight toward me, I could pull out my close range weapon or my melee. Your arsenal continues to grow and expand over the course of the game, never allowing any weapons to become too stale, and since you almost always have a choice of weapons every 10 to 15 minutes, there's going to be some sort of a weapon crate that allows you to pick between different guns and melee weapons of your choice before you move into the next chapter of the game. Out of the melee weapons, there's only 3 options, but they do play pretty differently, especially the hammer. The chainsword and the axe are somewhat normal. Slower or faster is really the only choice between the two, but whenever you get that hammer, boy is that thing beefy. It's real slow, and it only allows you to carry smaller weapons when you're wielding it, since it does require both hands for most of its usage. Combining this with the jetpack sections in the game, it can be utilized very well, and boy oh boy is it devastating when you do so. The orcs and the chaos demons won't know what hit them when you come flying in, smash into the ground from 100 feet in the air. Your basic rifle and handgun do receive some automatic upgrades, and the newer weapons do seem to have a bit more punch as you continue through the hours of the game, but outside of the basic concept of new stuff is better, there isn't really any progression to speak of, which felt a little disappointing, but with the short runtime and the wider variety of weapons, I feel like this was an okay choice for the overall pace of the game, keeping you out of the menus and just in the mix of the gameplay at all times. Whether you're using your favorite gun or bashing with your preferred melee weapon, you're gonna have a pretty good time with how everything feels. You can also perform these finisher moves, which is sort of required to maintain your health. Because your health itself doesn't regenerate, you do have kind of a Halo-esque shield regeneration, but it is really fucking slow. So instead, you gotta get your health back on a regular basis by, after doing enough damage to an enemy, they become glowy, allowing you to do this finisher move and stomp them into the ground. But the recent Doom games have taken this finisher move and kind of perfected it for the most part, where you bash your enemies in the face or stomp them into the ground and then you get some of your health back. There's ammo crates that are aplenty, and on occasion I found myself running out of ammo, but that was only if I was way too careless with it and I really wasn't paying attention. The 2 Space Marines that are with you for most of the game do basically nothing, and honestly, they have no point in being here other than for story reasons. They contribute nothing to combat, which is slightly frustrating because I wish they did. There's also a rage mode that you can go into, and it doesn't really impress much. All it does is give you some health regen. It slows down your aiming when you're trying to shoot, and then you do slightly more melee damage. It was pretty boring, and I barely used it outside of the occasion where I was low on health and I needed that health regeneration in a pinch. But other than that, the gameplay stands to be pretty decent, but nothing crazy impressive. I felt satisfied, but by the end of the game it did start to feel stale, which is why I'm glad it kind of ended when it did. As I said with the story though, the world is impressive in the way that it feels very lived in. The environments between combat zones are highly detailed and rather impressive. From a city being destroyed and blood around every corner to corridors of broken pipes and, well, that's about it. The city is breaking apart. It's already been mostly destroyed by the time you get there. Nothing is very detailed outside of these very small spots between all of the shooting and death. So the zones in which you're performing the combat in are extremely drab and dry. They're all brown and tan with nothingness. I wish that they did more in these sections to give some more texture and just feeling. They felt so lifeless and empty, which I know is sort of the point because it is a war zone, but you can make something artistic and simple at the same time. They failed to give this world just a bit of flavor, other than the occasional backdrop that gave me a small sense of, wow, that's cool, which honestly only happened maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the game. If they sprinkled this in more and even had moments within the combat zones that had me almost itching to search around more after I killed everything, just to be impressed by the environments on display, it would have done more for me. But with how basic and boring they made it, I felt moving on to the next zone was the best use of my time. The one thing that I'll say they did get right is the look of the weapons and the armor, especially the Space Marines from the different chapters and your own guys. They spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that these were impressive, showing not only their rank but other little trinkets adorning their shoulder pauldrons or belt buckles. It got me intrigued to look up exactly what these were meant to represent, from a weird skull to an actual scroll that was adorning the exterior of their armor. Usually these are apparently tied to their comrades or other accomplishments in some manner. The small amount of humanity that they are allowed to keep with them as mementos for their peers or leaders who came before. The characters' faces aren't the most detailed, but they also don't really look terrible either, so I can't really complain too much here. The enhancements to the graphics were a little lacking though. It's almost like they just slapped on a slightly higher resolution onto everything in the game and called it a day. Apparently they did add more crispy editing to the audio, but since this is my first time playing it, I don't really know the comparison to the previous audio and what that sounded like, but the guns and melee weapons sounded great here. The voice actors sounded good for the most part. I mean, nothing stood out to me. Explosions and demons and orcs were all punchy. I didn't really notice any music throughout the game though. If there was any, it didn't stand out and barely made an impact because I do not recall there being any really. Sometimes getting the job done though is a good thing when it comes to audio. Nothing bad is sometimes better than nothing great. There is multiplayer, which I actually did try out, and after queuing up I finally got into a game with a single other player, so it was a straight up 1v1. We went back and forth. He was pretty high level, so I was expecting him to honestly stomp the shit out of me. But I sat up in my fucking chair and I brought it to him, you know what I mean? And well, it ended in a draw. So I'll take it. He actually added me as a friend afterwards just to say GG, which was pretty awesome. It kind of reminded me of the old school days where, especially after you do like a random 1v1 deathmatch situation, you just be like, hey bro, it was fun, have a good one, and then you move on. I actually really enjoyed this and it put a big smile on my face. And I hope that if that dude enjoys this game, other people will hop on to give him a run for his money on occasion. But I didn't try out every single mode, I only played this one match. I realized that there was loadouts that were locked between levels, and after my single match I decided it just wasn't for me, so I moved on. Since it seemed to be just a random team deathmatch with no special sauce, it felt pretty lacking. But hey, that's what games were almost 15 years ago, some basic multiplayer and move on. Some of the last final thoughts that I want to add in here before getting to the very end of this review is the UI, technical issues, and some of the reception. I looked up some of the gameplay of Space Marine Anniversary and the original release, and the game is mostly unchanged. The UI is spruced up a little bit and moved around to different spots on the screen, but if you go on Steam or Reddit, you'll see nothing but complaints about random issues that this game has. I guess you could call it a remaster, but I don't even know if I would consider it that because it's not great. I personally had multiple tech issues whenever I tried to play it. My screen would randomly turn black, where I could still see the reticle and other UI elements and even hear sounds, but after about 10 seconds of this black screen, the game would just say, "You died," and it would reset me to the previous save spot. This was slightly annoying, but not really game breaking. Although a minor inconvenience, it was still an inconvenience nonetheless. And there are elevators galore in this game, like so fucking many elevators. Which, first of all, is not really great design. I know it's like their way of leading to the next zone while loading it, but second of all, as I would approach an elevator, one of the allies near me would be kind of further away, and after a few seconds, they would just teleport onto the elevator that wasn't even moving yet. Maybe this is that crazy warp magic that they keep talking about. I don't know. Nah, I'm just kidding, but the game is buggy as hell, and riddled with some small shit that really did bother me. Like, one of these small things here is the weapon wheel, where you use your left thumbstick to select a weapon in the wheel. Now this does not freeze time, and your character will still move because the left thumbstick is the one that you utilize to move your character. So if you want to select the weapon on the south of the weapon wheel, be prepared to run in a straight line backwards while you do so. Or whatever direction the weapon is that you want to equip that's on the wheel. You'll be running that direction when you attempt to utilize it. It is real dumb stuff and really stupid. There was also this boss fight early on with this flying thing, and yeah, this fight was fucking ass and I hated it, dying to it a few times just because you couldn't hide from it as it just shot at you, and then the weapon that you had to utilize to shoot back at it fired so slowly and with such a slow projectile speed with a weird arc that didn't really make sense that it made it nearly impossible to hit this aircraft that was just like flying around in circles. So there are a bit of frustrations when it comes to this game. For one, back with the original design 15 years ago, it just wasn't that great in the first place. And then second of all, it's got a ton of bugs and issues, so it doesn't have its best showing right here in this remaster. And although the game didn't run great and had some random issues, when I was able to play it, it was alright. I didn't find myself wanting to come back and play more necessarily, but once I did begin playing it, I didn't really wish that I stopped playing it either, or that it would hurry up and end. From some of the zones being a little bit unique, with a decent enemy variety and a cool assortment of weapons to choose from, I truly didn't mind running around through this game as Titus and just trying to prove, for one, I'm not a heretic, but also I'm a badass and I'm gonna fucking kill you all. Because Captain Titus is all about chewing gum and fucking people up. And man, is he always out of gum apparently. I did find the bugs and random glitches to be very janky and a bit of a mess at the best of times. The cost of this being at $40 is a bit of a crime though. I cannot recommend this at that price. I would say at most get it for like 20 bucks, but that's even pretty high for a game that's 15 years old. And with this remaster having almost no enhancements, I played through it because I was honestly genuinely interested in playing this at the time of release, but I just never got around to it 15 years ago. But I also really wanted to play Space Marine 2 that released just recently. Also getting into a bit more of the Warhammer 40k lore. Catching up on this game was always something on my to-do list to be able to go back in and play, and the remaster being on Game Pass was just kind of the excuse that I needed. That way I could knock it out sooner rather than later. But now I do feel ready to jump into the sequel, which I've heard is pretty amazing. Although this game comes from a bygone era of third-person shooters that are brown and basic, it's not the worst way to spend a weekend. It'll take you maybe 15 hours or so to beat this game. But with all that in mind, I hope you enjoyed this review of the master-crafted Warhammer 40k Space Marine. As always, if you've made it to the end here, do all that dumb YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time.